So this past week, we had some pretty interesting studies come out, and I have 3 that I will be diving into today. We're going to talk about whether lifestyle factors are more important than your genes when it comes to health, which is great because that is the main focus of this channel. We're also going to look into whether the current method of testing vitamin B12 levels is actually accurate or not in telling you whether there's a deficiency. Finally, I will be talking about the new study that came out recently, which linked paracetamol use during pregnancy to ADHD in children. So let's go. About a week ago, a study was published that investigated whether environmental factors, which are things like smoking, physical activity, the food that you eat, whether these things can impact on your health more so than your genes. Here is the study here appearing on the screen. It used information from nearly 500,000 participants from the United Kingdom, and researchers tried to see which environmental factors were linked to early or premature deaths for these people. Now, when I say environmental factors, it does cover quite a few things, because it is all the things that we are exposed to in our lives. So this includes things like lifestyle and behaviors, which means smoking, physical activity, nutrition, and sleep, but it also looks at things like socioeconomic factors, and this means things like your household income, your education level, and your employment status, so whether you are employed or whether you're not. And so it has looked into a lot of things. It's not just physical activity and nutrition, for example. And what they found was that these environmental factors actually do play a bigger role than your genes when determining how long you will live, or in other words, your health. In fact, this study showed that genetic differences accounted for only less than 2% of the differences between how long all these people live. What this means is that genetic factors are playing, in reality, a pretty small role in determining why some people live longer than others. Now, on the flip side, the environmental factors, they accounted for 17% of the differences. So what this study is trying to say is that your environmental factors have a larger impact on the differences in the health and lifespans of the people in this study. But this research did find some other very important information. It actually showed that there are some conditions that are more influenced by your genetics than others. So conditions like Alzheimer's and also certain cancers, so especially breast, prostate, and colorectal cancers, these conditions are more strongly linked to a genetic risk. So your genes play a larger role in these particular conditions. And your environmental factors, they have a stronger influence on conditions that impact on your lung, your heart, and your liver. So what it's trying to say is that your environmental factors, they seem to be more responsible for certain conditions, and your genetic factors more responsible for other conditions. We can't just flat out say lifestyle is more important than genes. They seem to have their own roles within certain conditions. Now, the most harmful environmental factors across the board, according to this study, were smoking, low income, living in public housing, and having poor mental health. I don't think any of these are quite surprising to anyone. And the most protective of these environmental factors were actually physical activity and having a higher household income. So again, I think these are things that we already knew. These were just the factors that they found had the most impact. As I said, there were heaps they looked into, and if you are curious about specific ones, the link to the study will be in the description. Now, what this study also showed is that early life exposures matter. So interestingly, children who were shorter or had smaller body size at the age of 10 had a lower risk of early death. And also, if a mother had smoked during her pregnancy, that child was then at risk of faster aging and premature death later in life. So these early decisions, they do make impacts throughout the rest of your life, especially when it comes to your health and how long you're going to live. The final finding that I want to talk about is actually what I think is the most interesting and the most important, and that is that exercise is key. Exercise had one of the strongest protective effects against aging and premature death. And at this stage, we really don't need any more studies to show how important exercise is, but I am going to continue to shout this out into the void. So please, please, please make movement a priority for you, no matter your age. It is the number one thing that you can do for your health. All of these results, they are observational. None of these results mean that you can definitely increase your lifespan by making these lifestyle changes, but it does mean that lifestyle changes matter more than your genetics, which is great. Because you can't change your genes, but you can change your lifestyle. And yes, genes are going to have an incredibly large impact on how your health will turn out. It's a very complicated field of science. The way you interact with your environment turns on and off certain genes. It's all beyond me. But to know that lifestyle has maybe a larger impact, or it can actually change things, is pretty empowering. It means you can actually do something about it. So hopefully that is good news for you, and something to take on board. Now on to the next study. This one was about vitamin B12. So a severe deficiency in vitamin B12 can lead to neurological issues. And the researchers in this particular study wanted to find out if what we consider right now to be normal levels of vitamin B12 can still lead to neurological issues. So it's pretty much trying to figure out if the current testing is good enough, really. So this study involved 231 healthy older adults with an average age of 71 years old. So a bit of an older cohort here. And that's because when you're looking at neurological issues, it is mainly the older adults that get the symptoms of this. Now, they looked at the blood B12 levels of these people, and they also did some neurological tests on them. And this included cognitive testing through looking at their reaction times. It included MRI scans so that you could see their brain structure, and it also had tests which measured how fast their brain processes visual information. So what exactly did they find out? Low levels of the biologically active B12 was associated with delayed brain signaling and slower cognitive processing speeds. The older someone was as well, the slower their processing became. Low active vitamin B12 levels was also linked to structural changes within the brain as well. They also found that high levels of the inactive form of vitamin B12 was associated with high levels of a protein called tau. Now this is important because tau protein is linked to neurodegenerative diseases. Alzheimer's is an example of that. What does this all mean? It means we need to be careful about what we are testing for in terms of vitamin B12. So when someone gets their vitamin B12 levels checked, it might not be the active form of B12 that is being looked at. So for example, a very common test is called the total vitamin B12 test. If that test comes back looking normal, it might not actually mean much because we don't know how much of that vitamin B12 level is the active form and which is the inactive form. Obviously, the active form is the one that does its job. It gives you the effects. So your B12 levels may be in normal range, but if you have low active B12, you are still at risk of neurological issues, and that's what this research was trying to find. So if you are getting your B12 levels checked, it is worth asking whether it's the active or the inactive form that is being looked at, because the active form is going to be way more useful, especially in older adults. Now moving on to the last study of the video. Paracetamol has apparently been linked to an increased risk of ADHD when used during pregnancy. This is a pretty large claim, and I feel like if you want to make this claim, you do need some solid evidence behind you, because paracetamol is one of the very few options that a pregnant woman has when it comes to pain relief. And up to 70% of women use it during pregnancy to help them with pain and also to help reduce fevers. So this study followed 307 women during the years of 2006 to 2011, and it looked at blood samples during their pregnancy. And from these blood samples, they could see who had taken paracetamol during this time because there is evidence of the medication within the blood tests. Now, before I go any further, in Australia, we call it paracetamol. In America, it's this fun word here that I probably can't even say. These are the same thing though. But what the study found was that children whose mothers had paracetamol in their blood were 3 times more likely to get ADHD. Now, I don't think this study is strong enough evidence for us to be telling women to not take paracetamol during pregnancy. There's a few issues that I had with it. It was a really small group of women in the study, and of this small group, only 62 of the women took paracetamol during pregnancy, and of those 62 people, 11 of their kids had ADHD, compared to 245 women who didn't take paracetamol, 21 of their kids had ADHD. So at this stage, the numbers are not big enough. We really need studies with much larger groups of people so that we can be a bit more sure of what we're finding. We also have very little information about the paracetamol use within these women. We don't know how often they took paracetamol through their pregnancy. We don't know what dose. We don't know why they took it. We just know, based on one single blood test, that they took a dose of paracetamol during their pregnancy. I would want to see way more research here before we start telling expecting mothers that they can't use paracetamol, because the reality is, what else are they supposed to do when they're in pain or they have fevers? Now, there were also studies conducted previously to do with this topic. There's this one from Sweden, and this study showed no link between mothers taking paracetamol and their children having ADHD. So we have a few conflicting studies as well. Now, as usual, the news have run with this idea and they have come up with headlines like this that might scare some people. Like with all medications, it is all about risk versus benefit, and it always comes down to the individual and their own situation. Decisions like this are best left between a patient and their medical team, not a news outlet that has seen a study and decided to make a very exciting headline for themselves to get clicks. So those are the 3 studies that I've run into that I think people should know about this week. Again, all the links to these studies are going to be in the description. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. And if you run into some interesting research yourself, let me know too. I will see you in the next video, and until then, keep playing the long game.